Hi. I thought that since we took time for introductions and other uh, sharing stories, I didn't finish all the materials. So I thought I'll record a bonus session and some additional information just came in hand. So in about 20 or 30 slides, I'll show this. In this way, you can watch some of these videos. Now, this is a Cars is a love story which started sometime in 1890, and if it all goes according to plan, which a lot of the more realistic people do not think it does, our love affair with cars as we have come to know it may end by 2035, or at least by 2050, perhaps. Or Mother Nature may force us with the that changes that are coming together. And I'll have several interesting slides. Now, when it comes to changes in humanity, with no disrespect to Newton or Einstein, two other discoveries that occurred in the uh, 18th and 19th century have had a bigger impact on humanity, starting from Ben Franklin's electricity. Obviously, there were others before that who worked on battery, and Carl Benz's automobile. And this was one way we were able to harness energy that was hidden in dead dinosaurs. And now we have created a huge uh, boon or curse, whatever we want to interpret it, with that on any time in the present time. By some estimate, there are 1.4 billion vehicles on the roads in the world. Now, obviously, railways were a big plus. It connected the continent and expanded, fueled the westward expansions. But cars are synonymous that it gives individuals a freedom. And it's ironic that while being in a steel cage, and it gives us freedom uh, to work, to explore nature, while at the same time ruining nature, and to make a living, and at the same time provide healthcare and deliver messages. All sorts of uses have been, and obviously, last but not the least, to make out. So that's the big part of American teenage experience, that I'm sure some of you, but you don't have to share it with me at this time unless you absolutely want to. Okay. And then, it's like one of the websites for car has borrowed freely the motto from New Hampshire: drive free or die. That's one of the websites. So I thought that was kind of cute. So, and we're heading towards the uh, not only just the demise of internal combustion engine, but at the same time, as human beings, we are in the danger of being replaced by driverless cars. And our uh, computer expert Bruce did a car, which I think some of you were there on driverless cars. And so that's the future. And again, so we've come a long way from Model T to a handmade red colored Mercedes Benz, which was made by the company as a gift for Nelson Mandela. And again, the love affair is well exemplified in movies, and not just in our driveway, but in private collections, in the Gilded Age, and all sorts of. Became a luxury item, and at the same time, feeling of macho-ness that every teenager has gone through. But obviously, that enthusiasm for that seems to be changing because the next generation has a different perspective, and the numbers are decreasing. That quite a few people of the I can never figure out whether it's the X generation or the Y generation, that they do not ever even bother to get driver's license. It's a whole changing economy, and I'll have some slides about that later on. Okay, now this is, this hieroglyphics that I have put in because, as you know, that I'm a science geek, and as human beings, and I did a class on human evolution. So, and I do, like a lot of elderly people, I have insomnia, and 3 o'clock, I do my best thinking sometimes. So I was thinking as to how does evolution it ties in. And so there are 4 E's that I could think about: the evolution, the elements, energy, and entropy. These are the 4 terms that quite a few of you have science background. So we talk about human beings. We are carbon-based units, as it was stated in Star Trek. And initially, we obtained our energy from carbon, that is from the grains and even meat. Basically, the energy comes from metabolism and carbon, that we consume. And then later on, the other elements that we used, we still continued to be carbon-based. But once we discovered that we could swim and we could navigate waterways, so that was the age of ships that's how a lot of the commerce was conducted, and obviously the waterways, the majority of civilization evolved around the water type of thing. And then obviously then later on we started using the primary elements was iron, of which cars are made. And again, the source of energy for that is still going back to the good old carbon. The dinosaurs who perished in a meteoric explosion, gave their lives, it turned into petroleum. That's what the energy which we are using. And then again, the element that we are transitioning to is silicon, which is our cell phones, which are connecting us to the world in all sorts of ways that cars used to do. And for that, the energy comes from a lithium and perhaps even a sodium-based battery that is being investigated. And again, when it comes to life, we are all made of DNA. And I think, as much credit as we would like to give to DNA, which is basically a source of information. And based on cars, we acquired information. We went to school in cars. We traveled in cars. We conducted, and we acquired all sorts of information that was available to us, type of thing. The rite of the passage was any high schoolers had cars. And that's how he acquired information. But now we're acquiring information from a different realm. So those are some of the thoughts. At the same time, there is for this energy that we are using, there is a price to be paid, and that is entropy, that we are losing energy. And obviously, and that may come back to haunt us. And obviously, all of you have heard the term. And this is, so we've come a long way, type of thing, from the good old Flintstone to 2-stroke and 4-stroke engine, where we learned to burn residues of dinosaurs and create energy. And this is I did not show it the first time, but this is the classic example of 2-stroke and 4-stroke engine, where the gas is compressed, ignited with a spark plug, and the energy, which is potential energy that is stored inside the fuel, is the chemical energy that is converted into thermal energy, then kinetic energy, and obviously sound energy. So so we lose some efficiency. So overall, it's not a very efficient way to generate energy, but that was the best we had going for last 150 or so years. Okay, and now I think, let's see if I can go further. Yes, okay. If I can play this, that would be interesting, because this is a nice timeline that is worth showing. And I think I have to stop this share and I will start a new share. Okay, let's see if I can do this. Yes, hopefully you can see this timeline. And this was a fascinating website that, and I think you can see this timeline for Anthropocene and Homo erectus habitus. Okay, then going back, how we just walked in the early days of evolution. Okay, and continued further, the explosion that took place and that almost causing substantial damage to humanity, megafauna of 50,000 years ago, and then going down further, cave paintings, the rise of culture, if you come to know it, and then Neanderthals disappeared somewhere along the line, beginning of Holocene, which is the present age, about 20,000 years. Okay, and then global land coverage. Again, so this is origin of farming that we started getting energy in a different source. Then again, with domestication of cattle, we learned a different mode of transportation. Obviously, very few people were riding bulls, but again, we just talked about the discovery of wheel, and urban settlements took place, and farming again increased our energy yield. Okay, and then other large-scale farming production took place. And we talked about the invention of wheel in Mesopotamia about, say, 3,500 years ago. And further, we discovered human wear and tear. Okay, you can see fertilizer waste type of thing. And the volcanic eruptions took place. Again, that's not too much relevant. We started expanding our knowledge based on printing press, which, if you had to talk about the uh, 14th century, that was one of the biggest invention of mankind. Okay, and then we finally found a lot of free land, and then the scientific revolution that gave us some understanding as to how to acquire energy and electricity that took place, and followed by coal entered the major source of energy, and the rise of industrial revolution. Okay, followed by the commercial steam engine that took place. First, we talked about, and that was there, and further that with railway expansion. Okay, and then again that brought us to the steam engine. Okay, and the population reaches 1 billion in 1804, and now we are numbers are staggering to we've expanded exponentially to pardon the pun. Okay, the explosion in the electric motor came around in 1822, and that gave us rise to further communication information. When we discovered oil, which I had that slide earlier, and then again we discovered fertilizers, that brings us full circle to Model T, as which we elaborated dramatically. And then we are talking about the other types of uh, transportation that we took place. And we again discovered a new, potentially useful and at the same time destructive force that we have discovered. And then further acceleration has taken place of energy use. And again, while we're working on the other sides, population has reached 7 billion. And at the same time, we reached carbon. And these are the goals. We are coming around to full circle. So that was an interesting perspective on the how we're rapidly march to Anthropocene age. Okay, and thought that was worthwhile sharing. In the class, it would be very difficult to show, but I think I will go back to my original slides now and screen 2. Okay, share. All right, hopefully you can all see the slides. Okay, and this is, I did not elaborate on this, because the internal combustion engine has had a variety of size. Hand cranks were in use in China as far as 350 BC current area. Various of the cranks were used in Byzantine era. Islamic inventors had twin cylinder pump and crank, along with air, then using air and fuel compression of a sort. And then again, finally, the real age modern engine came around with the use of steam with the Newcomen engine in 1712. And it was subsequently followed by electricity and petrol, as we talked about. And the earlier internal combustion engine were tied to bicycle and tricycle. And yes, I think we were wondering about the use of horses. And yes, there were as many as 15,000 dead horses left on the streets of New York every year. And the daily manure of 15,000 horses that pulled carriages for trade and pleasure and transportation, and the mass and the dirt and the filth and was just staggering. And so all major cities in the Western world were inundated by this problem. And to feed as many as 20 million horses, it took 1/3 of the farming area to just create to generate fodder. And this was the man who actually was several decades before Carl Benz and Daimler guy named de Rivaz, who was a French army engineer living in Switzerland. And he had invented a primitive internal combustion engine in as far back as 1807 using hydrogen ignited by electrical spark. And so this was, we can say the start. And again, later on, he built a type of early automobile for his new engine to power. So, but he's lost to posterity in history. Okay. And before cars, I did not, we talked about the velocipede, which was the foot-powered car. But the early modern bicycle came first, and this was the bicycle that was perfected, and it was called Rover. And you can see that it just looks very much like the modern bicycle. So it came to perfection as early as 1885, and it hasn't seen many revisions. At the same time, this is an ad from one of the British companies which had empire all over the world, Raleigh Bicycle. And yes, and in British India, there was a venture started in Bengal. It was called Sen Raleigh, S-E-N, Sen, which is a common Bengali name, Sen Raleigh. And this was my first bicycle. Yes, it had no gears. It was basically pedal power, and that was my mode of transportation to my high school. And the design stayed in vogue for several years. I'm sure it has changed by now, but this was the early start as to how once something has reached to perfection, there was not much need to revise. Obviously, then now the further gears and energy-saving devices have been attached, and now again we have e-bicycles and motor bicycles, attached to it. But this was the start of balancing. So okay, I just thought that was interesting. And again, I did not elaborate some of these electrical cars, but I think this was an interesting picture as to how some Scotsman named Robert Davidson had built a prototype electrical locomotive as far back as 1837. Later versions were developed which could go at 4 miles an hour, towing as much as 6 tons. Then another Belgian named Camille Genatzi, he built electrical carriages in France, and had demonstrated his acumen, and again did varieties of race car driving, and he was able to drive his electrical cars up to 100 kilometers per hour, and so that was a very viable proposition. And even on the American side, Ransom Eli Oates had built short electrical horseless carriages before he switched to petroleum-based. So that is still, this is one of his cars that is still in the museum in Lansing, Michigan, where his main factory was. And then, unfortunately, his factory burned out, and he later on moved to Detroit. And interestingly, a fact about Detroit that some of you may not know, that right after the War of Independence, Detroit was still not part of United States. The Brits decided to keep it for good measures, primarily because it had access to waterways and good fishing. So, and the original name, and this was it had come into British possession or was part of Canada after the French-Indian Wars. Okay, so and it was I think around 1796 that Detroit became part of U.S. and the whole name was Lake Pontchartrain du Detroit. Okay, so that was the French origins of Detroit, which is it's interesting how the trivia that one learns while talking. Okay, and this was one of the best-selling electrical car was Pope Manufacturing Company. It's called Electrical Car of 1897, and it was able to tower varieties of taxis in New York City in 1897 were electrical, and there was like a taxi fleet financed by Whitney, and so this was but they had some type of a stock scandal, and the whole organization just fell apart. So the future might have been different. What could have been, that's worthwhile. And then we talked about, how the big manufacturers were there. This I showed this already. but and each of these have individual stories about it. And I already mentioned about the Mr. Citron, who was the more colorful character in France, and he during the Depression and being Jewish and discriminated against, he went bankrupt, and shortly thereafter died of cancer. Okay, and on the German sides, we talked about how the German Empire, and we'll talk more about it in the regular class about the rise. Okay, now I think uh, Nick had raised the question about car racing, and yes, that was one easy way to popularize cars. The very first car race was very shortly thereafter from Paris to Rouen in 1894. And that was sponsored by one of the magazines, one of the French newspapers. And that was won by a colorful guy named Duboutin. He was one of the French gentry or upper class. And he won in using his steam car, which was big like a roller. And he had something called a stalker, who was loading his steam engine. So he was disqualified, but he won fair and square. Later on, there was a longer race from Paris to Bordeaux and back to Paris. So that was a real legitimate race. And there were some eccentric races that were carried out from Peking to Paris. And then there were some earliest race courses where I came into uh, force in first in down under in Australia and UK, and later on the one in Milwaukee came around. And last but not the least, in 1911, the great Indianapolis race opened up as well. And I think for those of you who are interested, you can open up this video link, and it's just a long video about the history of racing. And let's see.
La Roche-Posay Anthelio sunscreen visibly reduces the appearance of sun damage.
Okay, I will stop this share and I will. Okay. Okay, let me see if I can play this.
AG1 gives you high-quality daily nutrition that helps cover gaps in your diet in one simple scoop.
What's it like to learn math on Brilliant.org?
Okay, I'm sorry,
Brilliant gives you
I can
hands-on to
get
help you
fast
learn by
over the
doing. Learn
commercial.
topics from
But the Great Denis fails to finish the Paris-Vienna race, and an Englishman, SF Edge, takes the coveted Gordon Bennett Trophy to Britain. The Irish Gordon Bennett is a real international competition, with teams from Germany, the United States, Britain and France. To win. He has been practicing every day for 2 months.
Okay, so this is an interesting thing. So, but it's a long 30-minute video, so I think that only the real diehard fans would enjoy it probably. So I will stop it this time, but just to show that the link is there for those who care to see that on their own time type of thing. So, okay, let me start, see if I can find a second share again, and then go back to our regular thing. So screen 2, okay, share. All right, and let's minimize all this stuff. All right, and moving right along. Okay, and this is again another example of racing that this was a race that was organized in the United States. Again, you have to admire the courage of these guys, that this was a physician actually. He didn't have a whole lot of experience, but still on a whim decided on a $50 bet and to start from San Francisco in a really small car all the way to New York. And he participated in that. And he spent a substantial sum in a small winter touring car, which no longer exists, and with considerable hardship, as one can expect at time today, traveling with his co-driver, named Sewell Crocker, and a dog, of course, and wearing goggles to keep dust out of his eyes. He encountered various pioneers in wagon trains, cowboys, who helped them out, obviously. And again, he was well uh, received by the people who were living on the trail, and then had managed to reach. So that was some adventure. Then again, and I think he finally settled down his practice in Vermont. So it's an interesting piece of history. Jackson, Crocker, and Bud. And this is his throughout the crash. So this was the ad, and obviously was used in this advertisement campaign. And again, so these are varieties of manufacturers. A lot of these were self-made men who were sons of car blacksmiths, self-trained engineers, bicycle repairmen, and then they gradually caught the bug and branched out into car manufacturing all over the country. So again, very few of them had formal education. On the British side, the two pioneers that we did not elaborately, a guy named Mr. Herbert Austin, who lived from 1866 to 1941, and he was ran one of the most successful British car manufacturing company. He started out from a sheep shearing plant and to car manufacturer in somewhere near Birmingham, and went on to establish a big car making empire. His competitor was another gentleman who again started out from bike repair to motor car racing, and again, they were all self-taught men, and he established in the university town Oxford, but he did not have anything to do with didn't care anything for the university graduates, and was working class stiff, as the Brits would call him. Okay, and eventually he made peace with his, and then again he was knighted, as it quite frequently happens in Britain when you make money. And he donated a college, and he was given a title, and we went on to establish a Newfield College in Britain. Okay, so this is, and then again, they started a sporting division called Morris Garage, and that is the famous MG touring car that was popular even in the 50s and 60s later on. And both of them were in the Midlands, as they call it, and were the pioneer British Empire. And again, but they had a tough time to compete with the competition from the former colonies, i.e., United States. And gradually, when Ford made his company an assembly line, they imitated it, and with moderate success. And again, they had the big advantage that they had a successful export market to the empire. But with the collapse of the empire, again, then it's a fascinating story as to how they managed to lose the car industry, and that had a lot to do with the unions and mishandling of the labor movement, and the government, which the government, with again post-war austerity, insisted that they should export a certain number of cars, and that again, then that led to the gradual demise. And now I think, except for a few Rolls-Royce, and even that part, there a lot of them are foreign owned, so it's a sad story, and only to be repeated slowly on the American side. And we'll have more to talk about it, because and all of you remember as to how the Chrysler and General Motors went into bankruptcy, and I'll have a lot more slides in the regular sessions. Okay, and these are some of the pictures of Carl Benz driving his motor wagon. Okay, and looks, you can see that he looks like a typical German. Okay, and then this is followed by, let's see who else I have, and this is the first a Velo series, a regularly series automobile. This is Daimler, and who were both were eased out from the company that they started, basically. So it's one of those, and these are the British-sized manufacturers. And then one other thing, a famous manufacturer for Britain that I did not mention was a Bentley, which is the sporting version of the luxury car. And in the 1930s, a lot of the rich upper class Brits had car racing, and And obviously they had money and they loved this large Bentley automobiles, and they were called the Bentley Boys. And there were some colorful people who had lots of money and the thrill of adrenaline and speed. And that was the heydays of the empire. And so there was an interesting story of not quite like the Dead Poet Society, but like the Bentley Boys. So it's part of the British history. Okay, and, and and again, so these are the examples. I did not elaborate on Rolls-Royce, and you can just see this is the classic Rolls-Royce that was on all over the world by the rich people of the world, and the Indian Maharajas had yeah, obviously huge fascination for that, and they bought them by and personalized them, with some gaudy features, with the typical throne on the top. And there's in the class of Maharajas, I told a story about one a small uh, a Maharaja of a princely state. He had gone to shop in London, and he was snubbed because he was a brown man. He had gone with his whole entourage, and the next day he went and bought 6 Rolls Royce and used it as garbage cleaning trucks in his own state in India, and that was made the Rolls Royce a laughing stock all over the world. And the picture that I did not elaborate on this side, or I don't even think I showed it, is this is none other than the famous Lawrence of Arabia after First World War, that he used Rolls Royce in his desert campaign. Or I mean, you can say that, well, hero on one side is the terrorist on the other side. And this was Lawrence would say that the best thing that he had going for him was his Rolls, plenty and enough petrol, enough tires for his car. So he used his Rolls extensively during his campaign as a solo rebel leader in the Middle East theater of war. Okay. And again, we talked about the background of Rolls, who was rich with the proper British upper class education with Eton and Trinity. And it teamed up with an odd fellow named Royce, who was a superb engineer. And then again, they built quality, the best cars, and they cost 2,500 pounds in the early part of 20th century. Again, those were not for the masses, you can understand that. And so this was the European way of manufacturing. It was totally different than the mass manufacturing that was pioneered by Henry Ford on this side of the continent of the Atlantic. And again, and the Austin and Morris did their share on mass marketing automobiles. Okay, so that's a part of the two major nations. Okay, and again, we talked a little bit about this caste warfare. I showed this slide, but I did not elaborate. That Wilson, he had made the statement that nothing has spread socialistic feelings in this country more than the use of automobiles. And this was counteracted by the automobile manufacturers, that no car owner can ever be a communist. And so this was again, the warfare that was going on, because the cars were frightening the horses. And but as early as in 1906, there were like 25,000 cars in United States. But you can see the expansion that in another 20 years, we had gone up to 3.1 million from 25,000, and out of which 101.8 million were made by Model Ford. The one quote that I did not tell, that when Ford became successful, one reporter had asked Henry Ford that, Mr. Ford, aren't your views out of step with the modern age? And he snapped, young man, I invented the modern age. So it was, and it was an appropriate response. You can see that it democratized car ownership and expanded the westward expansion, and changed the outlook of America. Farmers, small tradesmen, physicians, mailmen, they all started using, and that led to the improvement of roads that we'll talk about later on. Okay. And I had shown this already, that the wealthy businessmen had fathered driving safety and the proper way of turning, keeping to the right, hand signals, and the earlier traffic signals came out, They started in Britain even before cars in 1848 and 60 with the green and white light on London Bridge, and later on switched to electrical lights. And the first electrical light was introduced in Cleveland as early as 1910 on Euclid Avenue. Okay, so varieties of traffic arrangements, and Milwaukee had certain uh, uh, the traffic signaling to avoid fatalities that were very common in those days. Okay, and I had shown this slide, but I don't think I had forgotten to give the explanation for this German Nuns and Bibendum. Okay, it's and I think that generally means, it is time to drink, and that's the quote is from Horace. Okay. And at the same time, one other interesting tidbit was that Michelin brothers not just were tire manufacturers, but they were ahead of their time. They had published an ambitious Michelin travel guide as early as 1903, when there were only 3,000 cars. Okay. And in France and even in US, so a guide was about 400 pages, and they printed 35,000 copies. But I think they knew something that others did not, that it became a very successful venture and encouraged people to travel and explore the continent, the world as we came. So, and they're still very much around, and they're some of the best tire manufacturers in the world. Okay, and there's the symbol, which was I'm not sure who created that, but that was that was the start of the famous Michelin Man. Okay, and then again, this is just for sake of time, I'm not going to be able to show some of this video, but now I think I can show this. You can see this. You may have already seen it in the past. Okay. Okay, so you can see this on your own type of thing, and I'm sure it's easily findable. Modern Times is one of the Charlotte's most classic, and a satire on the social criticism and I think, and trying to keep pace with the life for assembly life. So you can just imagine that, at least I've never worked on an assembly line, but this is the Ford's assembly line. This was no matter he increased the pay for retention type thing, and the movie is actually a very nice commentary on the industrial age and the factory worker thing. So, and then again, he and factory worker and the girl has various adventures, and finally they evade the police and struggle for a better life. So it was a nice, one of the classics of Charlie Chaplin. Okay. And again, this brings us to the American side. Again, this video that I won't have time to show, but the American tire manufacturers, who was a compatriot of Henry Ford, was a guy named, they started from a Germanized names after the war. It was more sensible to change it to a more English sounding name. So from Feuerstein, it became Firestone. And there was the start of the automobile tire, and okay, and it made way into the British monopoly of for rubber that they used to have from South America and later on Malaya in Southeast Asia. And then again, they tried to introduce rubber farming in Liberia, which was a free colony at that time. Firestone had moved to Chicago in 1896 with partners, And again, the retail tire business was opened, then later on to Akron, and developing patent for mechanism uh, to apply rubber tires to carriages and later on to cars. Let's see if I can play this video. I think this one is relatively
In
short.
the early 1930s, roughly 1 million steel-wheeled tractors could be found throughout the nation.
In the early 1900s, steel-wheeled tractors were very, very miles an hour, therefore providing greater inefficiencies on the field.
Over the next decade, several Ohio-based companies attempted to create effective rubber tires for agriculture. However, it was the efforts of Harvey Firestone and his son Leonard of the Firestone Tire and Rubber Company that led to the development of a whole new tire.
Harvey was committed to bringing farm tire technology to the farm because simply he was a fourth-generation farmer. Farming was in his blood. He had a significant passion for it. He often was trying to bring a level of innovation, improvement for farming. And he saw this opportunity to bring a pneumatic farm tire in 1932 to the American farmer. And that technology, that drive for innovation is still the centerpiece of what Harvey wanted to do. And so Harvey Firestone and his sons discovered a rubber compound that provided both durability as well as flexibility and greater traction and lower compaction for the American farmer.
Harvey Firestone is known as a historical figure, credited with advancing the interstate highway system and being one of the industrial leaders of the 20th century.
Harvey Firestone was a remarkable man. He was a remarkable husband, father, and business leader. First and foremost, he was very, very humble. Partially
Could support and expand
Okay, so you can see this, after so the YouTube thing is there right there. So I think this will be recorded, but I just give you an example that this is along with the cars, the tire industry rose in parallel.
agricultural.
Okay, and then again, this is something that Ford had his fingers in all pies, and in Brazil he had bought a lot of areas, land, and developed and tried to establish something called Fordlandia. Okay, and then this was struggle with rubber barons of Europe, and and then again. And then there's an interesting movie called Fitzcarraldo, and he explored entering the rubber business, and and then he points out a map that only unclaimed parcel in the area was located on the small river in the tributary of Amazon. It was cut off from Amazon into the Atlantic port. Okay, so he decided that to another tributary and tried to investigate. And there was a movie that was one of the German movie makers had made a movie about called Fitzcarraldo. So bizarre movie as to he tries to get his piano and the whole concert across this mountain ridge. Okay, and but that's a sidetrack type of thing. So again, so this is one of the ventures of Fordlandia, which again did not get out to be too successful. Okay, and this is some of the other races that we talked about, that across the states in 50 states, which I mentioned to earlier. Okay, and Ken Burns had made a movie about
The
it.
Vermont was bruised, but to everyone's relief, still able to run. They drove on through Syracuse, Utica, Schenectady, determined now not to stop for anything. They crossed the Hudson at Albany and turned south to follow the east bank of the river. News of their approach brought out cheering crowds as they passed through the towns of Hudson and Poughkeepsie. In Peekskill, they were delayed briefly to patch a punctured tire by the glow of a hotel's outside light. There, a delegation of reporters, Winton Company officials, and Jackson's wife Bertha met them in a fleet of cars to join in the final miles. It was 4:30 in the morning on Sunday, July 26th, when they crossed the Harlem River into Manhattan. drove down the city's deserted streets, and finally honked their horn to awaken the night porter at the Holland House Hotel on 30th Street and 5th Avenue. Jackson had made it from San Francisco in 63 days, 12 hours, and 30 minutes, well within his wager of 90 days, and having become the first to drive a car across the nation. Once New York woke up to the news, he and Crocker and Bud were the toast of the town.
The New York Herald.
Okay, so this was, I mentioned earlier, but this was, this was the film that Ken Burns made as only he can. So one can say this is the American equivalent of Phileas Fogg, and the famous Jules Verne story.
Dr. A.
Okay, and this is again, this is the inside tour of Henry Ford Museum. Okay.
Hi, I'm Patricia Moradian, president of the Henry Ford in Dearborn, Michigan. As a valued partner, we want you to be among the first to know that we are changing the name of Henry Ford Museum to Henry Ford Museum of American Innovation. While the name of the overall destination remains the Henry Ford, extending Henry Ford Museum's name to include the word innovation better serves our visitors, not only in this community, but across the country and around the globe, as it effectively conveys the core idea that threads through the museum's key collections: innovation. The museum has always been about ideas and innovations that change the world. Its name now directly reflects its focus. Innovation comes in many forms, whether it is a technological idea, a social movement, or a new way of thinking. The unparalleled collections on the floor of Henry Ford Museum of American Innovation are there for the inspiration and education of our visitors. Whether you are walking through Buckminster Fuller's Dymaxion House or sitting on the actual bus in which Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat, the museum's core promise has always been to activate people's imaginations and
Okay, and the collections at the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn include the presidential limousines of JFK, Abe Lincoln's chair from the Ford Theater, Thomas Edison's laboratory, bicycle shop of Wright brothers, Rosa Parks bus, as she mentioned, and again, 1961 cars, Lincoln Continental. Okay, and then let's see what else that they have. Yeah, the Buckminster Fuller house, that thing. And then a varieties of other automobiles, the Newcomen engine. Okay, so, and the list goes on. So it's if you're in the Midwest, that's a thing. And then last but not the least, even Toyota Prius makes their.
ignite that.
Okay, now, and this is something that timeline that I had put together for the early concepts. Okay, then just it would be worth playing, because this is not on YouTube, obviously. I think it took, some time. It was worth doing it. Okay, yeah, this is on YouTube. Sorry, I misspoke. I think actually there was the other one that I had put, which I deleted it because this was far better. Okay, all right, because I only had about 10 or 15 images. But again, you can see this book is down to the modern age. Okay, and I'll zip through that quickly because these you have seen on this card, so there's nothing special about those. Okay, all right, moving right along because this was just by sheer coincidence. My favorite magazine, The Economist, had a whole series on articles about a special report on the car industry. So I will send out along with the uh, recording, but just in case not everybody would have the interest or the time to read about 20 pages of it. So I just summarized some of these, so these are their pictures. So there are like close to 1 billion cars on the road, and China is now the biggest market, and about 13% of market in the world is now electric vehicles, as you can see that the biggest manufacturers are, Toyota and Volkswagen, and Americans have fallen behind. Now, this is a conglomerate of various companies, so that's not quite fair. And even Tesla makes the grade now. Okay, the meteoric rise of Tesla that we are seeing. Now, the US market is about 5%. We are aiming for 50% by 2030. That may be the target may be harder to easier to say than done. Okay, considering how big United States is and how ruggedly individualistic Americans tend to be. Okay, and competitive market, there are big changes. As you can see, the passenger car production has actually peaked, so to speak, and then it's gone down. Now maybe the decrease in 2021 may be due to COVID type of thing, but again, there are a lot more players appearing on the world, and then everybody's chasing Tesla when it comes to electrical cars. So they are way ahead in terms of their software, 5 years ahead of the others, and it's boiling down to the battle of the two giant superpowers, as to who will dominate the industry. Okay, and the East is red. The EVs are relatively easier to make compared to regular, but again, so it is harder for big older companies to retool, and becomes a bigger expense. But based on something called the vertical integration, the new companies can start up scratch type thing. And again, and the big established manufacturers, their profit margins are relatively small, while Tesla has laughs all the way to the bank. Now, again, a lot of the market is for batteries, which is, the power source, that they're controlling as much as a lot of the European market is owned by Chinese, and the PRC seems to be replacing the United States. And you can see some of these names that are not familiar to us, and are controlled. There are a lot of unions of odd bedfellows taking place in the EV marketing all around the world, and especially in the developing worlds. Also, the Chinese have a big stronghold. You can see that the Chinese company BYD has a huge market share, and is likely to increase substantially because they control, at least this, for now, they seem to control a lot of the rare materials. Okay, and the future is electric, and people are expecting that it will go, be a substantial rise. EU plans to ban in 2035. Chinese goal is 20% by 2025, and that. But the biggest factor restriction is still the price and the range. And again, so the governments all over the world are trying to encourage it by subsidy, and the people who are anti-government, would love their subsidies. And you can see how the market is slowly but steadily expanding, and continues to be expected to get bigger as time goes by. And the rise of Tesla, that it started out with 3,100 cars manufactured in 2012, okay, with a profit of 400 millions, and now they're manufacturing 1.4 million cars, and with a huge profit margin. And they started out, they bought the car manufacturing plant and the machinery very cheaply from a failed venture of General Motors and Toyota in Northern California. and they have something called the vertical integration that from different suppliers are put together. They're likely to face challenge from Volkswagen, and a lot of the battery manufacturers are still centered in Asia and controlled by China, South Korea, and Japan. And again, the mining giants, that the BHP and other peoples have a role, and who controls the charging, which is going to be another big business model uh, uh, that is going to play a huge role. Okay, and the other cars, Japan, who everybody was afraid of in 1980s, they missed the goal. They're still very strong on hybrid, and they went on to the wrong direction of hoping that hydrogen will take big place. And you can see that their market is relatively puny. And on the other hand, uh, uh, tropical countries like India are concentrating in two-wheelers, and large number, well, even a lot of people do not afford regular four-wheel cars, and the majority of market is dominated by two-wheelers. But again, there are a lot of local manufacturers, and there's something called auto rickshaws, widely used in India, and 40% of the three-wheelers are now electric. And the goal is more ambitious. Again, even there, the government is giving subsidies to manufacturers. And again, they import a lot of petroleum. So with this way, at least they'll be able to use electricity, which they can plenty of generate from electrical coal-based plants and nuclear plants to a lesser extent. Okay, and in the future, software basically. So a lot of the tech giants are involved into it. And again, like quite often I get an email that Tesla wants to update my software, and over the air, even though I've owned the car only for a couple of months, I've had like at least 2 or 3 software updates. Okay, and there's software engineers are much more in demand even in the car industry. And again, the Germans cannot be ruled out. Let's play this.
For Germany, it's the end of an era. And as Europe's biggest economy, there are some huge challenges ahead. From its increasingly complex relationship with China to climate change, all eyes will be on how Germany's new leaders grapple with these issues. But there's one German industry that reveals a lot about the country's prospects. It's cars.
Traditionally, the car industry here has been very powerful. There have been open doors to German ministries, to the Chancellery.
Germany's car industry is a vital part of its economy, with links to government that go back decades. How this world-renowned motor industry navigates the challenges ahead could tell you more than you think about Germany's future. The curves, the precision. It's cutting-edge engineering like this that has helped place car makers at the heart of the German economy. And the industry has proved a bellwether for the country's future prospects too. Since the 70s, car exports have risen with Germany's wealth and influence.
Manufacturing is incredibly important in Germany. It represents around 18% of GDP, and of course the car sector represents a very large part of that. It's not quite, where the car industry goes, Germany goes, but this sector is absolutely crucial to the future of Germany and the future of its industrial model.
But that industrial model could be under threat. After over half a century of global dominance, German car makers are now playing catch-up. And it's not just the car industry that's losing ground. In 2000, 7 of the world's most valuable companies were German, but in the past 2 decades, that number has fallen to just 3. How Germany's car makers attempt to claw back global market share could be telling for the economy as a whole. Take international relations.
Okay, so you can see that this was an interesting piece, that's on the same magazine article for Germany. Okay, I think we're coming to the end of this, because I had said that this would be like a 1 hour of bonus talk, basically. And this is the last slide, I think, of autonomous vehicles. And again, our fellow presenter, Bruce Gobioff, did a car on self-driving cars, so I won't elaborate on it. But again, that's coming, but that's going to take time. because the regulations and are going to be difficult to navigate, and it will be a long time before it get. And there are varieties of strange combinations that are taking place. Bruce talked about Waymo by Google, Cruise, which is a GM venture, Uber has their own division, even Amazon is into it. And so these are the tech giants are jumping into it. And instead of ownership, they're trying for subscription services. And the car dealer, which all Americans have learned to hate, that may be a thing of the past, is direct to consumers, it type of thing. And obviously the Arab money and investments are nothing to be sneezed at. But ultimately the big fight is going to be between the China and US as to who dominates the future auto market. And so that was an interesting piece from The Economist. So I will send a copy of the article along with it. I'll stop the share and I will stop the recording. Okay. And we'll send this out and hopefully we'll see almost all of you next week. Thank you, folks.